A beautiful morning to everyone. It's wonderful to have you join us for another one of HOWA's virtual caravan class on how to buy a vehicle. There will be a 30-minute talk from our presenter and 30 minutes for question and answers. The chat will open up at 9:25 for you to send your questions on the topic, how to buy a vehicle. The class ends at 10, however, the chat feature will remain open for an additional 15 minutes to interact with the presenter and other attendees. I'm delighted to introduce our speaker for this morning's class, Cliff Pitcher. Cliff is a full-time nomad in his fourth year with a background and interest in automotive, mechanical, carpentry, electrical, and solar applications. He's a previous owner of an auto recycling business in Seattle with experience in buying and selling hundreds of vehicles. Cliff participated in the first HOWA van build and is currently acting as a mentor to the first East Coast van build. He has a keen interest in helping new nomads becoming established and comfortable in the nomad life after he himself received tremendous help from the nomad community, the RTR, and Bob's videos. Cliff began his nomad life in December 2017 in a Ford E350 van and pop-up tent trailer, and travels today in a 28 feet Class C RV. He directly credits his improved health and life outlook to his leap of faith to become a full-time nomad. Please welcome Cliff Pitcher.
Oh, hi, Alicia, and thank you for that kind introduction. And thank you, HOWA, for providing these learning resources for new people getting started. Today, I hope to share some tips with you that might help you buy a van to become a nomad. Much of what I'll cover today will be from my experiences of getting started and buying a van with fairly modest resources. That's how it was when I got started. And I found my story to be similar to others that are getting started in the nomadic lifestyle with limited resources. I'll also add that I'm from the West Coast, and most of my buying experiences were in Washington and Oregon. I won't have advice for or much experience with vans that were in states that use lots of salt or corrosive chemicals in the winter to keep their roads safe. So my information might not be fully pertinent. There's lots of good perspectives on buying a van, and mine stems from my experiences only. Please explore as many resources and perspectives as possible. I hope some of my understanding will help you if you're looking for tips for buying a van to become a nomad. So let's get right into it. Purchasing a van is always a hot topic, and vans have been a very popular and fairly easy way for many people to get their nomadic life started. Don't get me wrong, for me, getting my nomadic life started and getting my first van was not easy. And I almost didn't even make it out the door at all. And in the end, I changed my vehicle after the first year anyway. So, in retrospect, for me, I don't think I would have figured out the beauty of the lifestyle without having first done my clumsy best effort to make a wild stab at getting things in order to have a chance to make a change in my life and get out on the road. So the first decision and some of the early decisions I made, I changed much later, but hopefully this will help you have some new perspectives. Again, had I not managed to buy that first van and get out and test the waters, I may have never made it out of my dissatisfying life. And that's very, very true. Once I actually began to get out and start to experience the nomad life, I started to realize the richness and value of it. Um, for many, they may change their vehicle as they can more afford it. Once I got out on the road and was not paying 850 rent anymore, I had extra money that I could put aside for a vehicle in the future, and that's what I ended up doing. So you have to figure out what best suits you, and you may not hit it the first time, but getting started is super important. So getting started also with a smaller commitment is also a great way to see if the nomadic lifestyle is suitable for you. Some people are unaware of what vehicle will really work for them in the long run. So oftentimes they'll start with a van and later may go bigger or some go smaller. Uh, little of this can be determined if you don't start somewhere and find out what's comfortable for you. So there are types, I'll talk now about different types of vans that you might be looking at. The two most common types of vans are full-size vans and minivans. Full-size vans used to be the type of vehicle that was often used in business, and then they kind of were discarded or almost discarded or sold pretty cheaply. And but today that is changed dramatically, and getting full-size vans not only can be hard to find, but the prices can really be pretty high. And so if you're on limited resources, you might find that a full-size van may or may not be too expensive for you, or might not be suitable. So and then when it comes to full-size vans, in my life, I used to be a Ford guy. So I would think, well, yeah, I'm going to get a Ford because Fords are great. But nowadays, um, it really most of the vehicles are made fairly equally. There's certainly some lemons, and there's uh, better features one to another, but they're fairly close. If you buy a van that has a Ford that's got 50,000 miles on it, and you buy a Dodge with 50,000 miles on it, the differences in features and power and all those kind of things are fairly equal. And it may actually come down more to the actual way the vehicle was treated and the wear and tear on the vehicle rather than the specific brand or even the mileage in some cases. Secondly, minivans are the other option, and minivans have become very popular for nomads. There's millions of them out there, and they come in a wide range of quality and pricing. So there's lots of different choices, and it's not hard finding. Usually, you can open up any one of your search tools and you can find a load of minivans available. They may not be all within the range that you're looking for, but there's usually quite a few available. So let's talk about some of the basic requirements when purchasing a van. Some of the stuff that you might use as a way to determine its value. So here are some of the criteria that I think HOWA may have originally used in some of the vehicles, and I've updated it and changed it a little, but it still has some helpful information that I think you might want to shoot for. So first off, we usually look for a vehicle that is under 120,000 miles. If you can find something under 100,000 miles, that's even better. But most vehicles today are such that 100,000 miles is still leaves a lot of remaining life in the vehicle, and still it's very serviceable. And most vehicles, the drivetrain is good for a couple 100,000 miles these days. So if you find a vehicle, uh, if you can get it under 120 or under 100,000 miles, that's great. When it comes to the year of the vehicle, what I found is that if you can find something that is the year 2000 or newer, you will generally get a lot of the modern upgrades like ABS brakes, airbags, some of the new safety features. Many of them have been added by the time you reach the year 2000. So that's a good year. If you can get a 2000 or above, that's a good start. Pricing. So pricing is certainly very subjective, and in my case, it was subjective to what I had available. But a common price range for a vehicle that might have 100 or 120,000 and is 2000 or newer, you might find a range up to about $3,500. Now, uh, that price would be kind of what you want to have in the basic vehicle before you start working. So let's say it needed a set of tires and those were going to be $400. Well, you'd have to deduct that from your 3,500 because you know that you're going to have to add a set of tires. So we usually find that we can find a vehicle or a vehicle in the price range that with tires on it and pretty much ready to go mechanically for $3,500 or less. Now, when I started out, I didn't have that much money. I only had a little over 2,000. I ended up buying a van for $2,300. But with that, I was able to get a vehicle that worked very well for me. But there is a range, and uh, hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea. Some of the features that you might want to have on the vehicle, um, little things like a roof rack. Roof racks are valuable to attach things to, and oftentimes people use them to attach their solar panels. So roof racks are usually a plus. Um, Again, when it comes to the brand of van, there's a lot of good vans out there. One of them that's been popular has been the vans that are made by Dodge or Chrysler, the Caravans, or not sure, I can't remember what the Chrysler calls theirs, but uh, they sold more of those vans for many years. They were the highest selling van of any van for like 9 years straight. There's millions and millions of these out there, and they tend to be pretty good, both in price and they are pretty good in size. They're a little bigger than some of the older, smaller, uh, like the Ford, I believe it's Windstar, the Ford Windstar or Aerostar is a little bit smaller than the Caravan. So that's something to consider. So another thing to consider is uh, having the vehicle registered in the state that you're already in. So if you go to purchase a vehicle and the vehicle is from out of state, that can present some hassles. Uh, it might require some extra work or an inspection. In Washington, you have to bring it to the State Patrol for an inspection oftentimes. And sometimes the registration can be a little trickier or require an extra fee. So that's something to consider. Um, Now, uh, the uh, next step in buying a vehicle would be evaluating the vehicle. So there's some criteria of what the vehicle might be that I've gone over, but there's also some resources you might consider to compare what the actual book value of the vehicle is. And so some of the sites that you could use to go check and see how the vehicle is valuated on the market, you could check Kelly Blue Book, and that is KBB as in boy, KBB.com. And the other one is NADA or NADA, NADA, Blue Book, and they're NADA.com. So those are sites where you could go in, look up a vehicle, put in the model, put in the year, and those kinds of things, and it'll tell you what the average selling price is, what the retail selling prices is, and a variety of information that hopefully will help you determine the value of the vehicle. Uh, uh, it's hard just to from history, memory, or anything to be able to just automatically know the value of a vehicle. So any type of comparison information is helpful. So I usually look up the book value of the vehicle too to see if it is in the range. So after all that, and you're still interested in the vehicle, then it's time to start an inspection. And so I look at it as two types of inspections. One is inspection that I'll take and have a mechanic do that I kind of consider a safety and full mechanical inspection. And a lot of garages offer these, a lot of mechanics offer them. I've seen the service advertised both on Facebook Marketplace and on Craigslist. And I've used these services before. I've called someone up and had them, they charged me, one charged me $100, and another one I had to charge me $150. And in one case, the vehicle panned out perfectly, and I was very happy to have spent the $150. And the other one, the vehicle ended up having a major problem, and so I was unhappy and didn't make the deal, but I was not unhappy that I spent my $100 to save me from buying that vehicle. So here's some things, first off, that you can check yourself and consider before you decide you can take it to the next level and take it to a mechanic for a full inspection. So some of the things I look at is I always check the fluids, like the oil. You want to check the oil, and beware if the oil is overfilled or if the oil is milky or dirty. That could be a deal breaker. Transmission fluid. In an automatic transmission, the transmission fluid should be bright red and should have no burnt varnish smell to it of any kind. If it has any kind of burnt or foul smell to it, it's probably not good, and that would probably be a deal breaker. Next, you want to check, of course, the antifreeze and the coolant. So you want to make sure it has the right level. Visually, is it clean? And if there's problems inside the uh, cooling, the water looks funky, it looks strange, that could be a deal breaker. Uh, and so that could be worth uh, uh, further questions or further inspection. Again, things like power steering fluid, check the level. If the level is low, it may mean it's low because it's leaking. So then you can look further and see if there's leaks. If it's full, um, it's usually a better sign. Brake fluid, same thing. Make sure it's got the correct level. And brake fluid should have clarity. It should be able to be seen through. So not opaque, not dirty. It should look good. One of the things I've missed many times on buying a vehicle is taking time to really inspect all the glass, windows, and doors. So I've bought a car before and inevitably got to the passenger back window and it didn't roll up or down because I didn't check it. I bought it, it was mine. So I recommend you check all the window mechanisms, look for cracks or sometimes even delaminating glass. And look at tinting. In most cases, tinting is helpful uh, for the privacy value and protection from the sun, because, hey, we're trying to be in the sun most of the time. So uh, uh, tinting can be very helpful. Windshield wipers. The blades and arms, of course, that's important to check, but the most important is to make sure that the wipers themselves are functioning. And I don't mean they just wipe. They go low, they go medium, they go high, they go intermittent, they squirt water. All of those things are pretty important for safety. So check the wipers and make sure everything works. Of course, you've got to have a good heater and an air conditioner. And my choice, I always make sure the vehicle has an air conditioner. Uh, who knows where you're going to be? We're usually in warm places. If you can have air conditioning, it's a big plus. In my case, if it doesn't have air conditioning, it's a deal breaker. I don't like air conditioning. I don't like to be in areas that require air conditioning, but I absolutely, as a nomad, on my fourth year, I would not consider uh, a vehicle without air conditioning. Tires. Let's talk about tires. Tires uh, is also another major factor. And there's a couple of things to consider. One, of course, you want to check the tread and the uh, tire size, compare to make sure all four tires are the same brand, same size. That's very important. Not always that they're exactly the same brand, but certainly in any vehicle that has all-wheel drive, all the tires nowadays really need to be matching and make it better. So mostly it's the tread and the life left on the tires, but there's also another factor that oftentimes gets overlooked, and that is the age of the tire. So I have bought a vehicle before that had just really great looking tires. And in fact, they'd actually put the tire shine on there and they looked great. And I looked at them and they looked pretty good. They looked good and they had lots of tread on them. But in the end, they had too much life on them, too many years on them. They were too old. And first off, a vehicle should not be used if it's over 7 years old. And so, age of a tire, particularly when you're heading into climates that are mostly sunny, those tires take a beating from the sun and or will not be safe, really, if they're over 7 years old. And as a nomad, you're traveling, you're carrying all your things. You've got your belongings, you've got your, in many cases, everything that you own. And so I really recommend a good set of tires that you can really feel safe and comfortable on. And so make sure if it doesn't have good tires, that you put that as a high priority for getting started. Another thing to think about is with tires is making sure that the car has a spare. Simple thing. A lot of vehicles you'll find used vehicles are sold without a spare. Well, that's going to cost you $50 or $100 to get another item. So make sure it's got a spare. And if it doesn't, well, then you're going to negotiate the price down. Another thing that's fairly easy to check on some vehicles, not all, but if you go up and push a vehicle down on, let's say, the front fender and let it up quickly, it will allow the vehicle to bounce back up. And if it has bad shock absorbers, you can sometimes see that the shock will come up and it'll bounce a few times before it stops. Well, that usually means that the shocks are worn out, not doing their job. This might be something that it will make it to the mechanical and safety inspection, but if you can determine in advance, that would be helpful too.
Excuse me, Cliff, sorry to interrupt. You have 5 minutes left for your presentation, and the chat is now open for questions from attendees.
Oh, great. Thank you very much. So, another consideration after shock absorbers might be, has the vehicle been smoked in? This can be a deal breaker. If you're sensitive to cigarette smoke, as many are, even though this can be eliminated with vinegar or an ozone generator treatment, there are ways to deal with it. But again, that's costly. And for some people, just the odors it can be a deal breaker. So make sure it smells good and that it's a pleasant place to be inside. Has it had a pet in it? Same as above. You might find items, vehicles that have had a pet in them, and it can't be hard to get that out, some of the odors out. And so, again, some of these things are your personal preference. Some of them are critical to safety. You got to figure out what's best for you. Again, check out the further things to check out are the accessories, the cruise control, the radio, stereo, seat operability. That's a big one. I've missed that before in the past. Make sure the seats move, whether they're mechanical or electrical. Make sure the seats are fully adjustable and are working properly. Check out each and every item possible. As you once get finished and make your deal, there's like no turning back. So you can't go back and say, oh, that back window doesn't work. You didn't tell me about that, because you already made your deal and the deal's over. So check out as much as you can. Be as patient as possible. Take as long as you need to ask questions and take as much time as you need. Most buyers that are honest and are there to try to sell you a good item, most of them are going to be patient and listen. If they're uptight, they're in a hurry, well, maybe it's not a good deal. Maybe that's a deal breaker. So now you have to determine what are the deal breakers and what are the negotiation points. Because sometimes you might find some things that are not doable, but you really want the van. It's got some items that need to be fixed. So you still want the van, but it doesn't meet up to your standards. So that's where the price comes in. And so you have to take all the criteria that you know. What do you think those sell for commonly? Does it have the features I want? Is it comfortable? Do I feel safe? And then you determine, what is it worth to me? How much more am I going to have to put into it? What is it worth? And is it worth it for me to make an offer on it? Because if I make an offer on it, I'm then going to spend $100 to $150 on having it inspected. So make your steps and figure that out. I'm going to give you a couple of resources that I use that may help you in finding a vehicle, because there are sometimes some that people don't know about. Some of the services that are available online are cars.com. I can't recommend them for having good vehicles. I've never actually bought one through them, but I have looked at many vehicles through them and have compared and found a good knowledge that helped me make a decision about another vehicle I ended up buying. So cars.com is one. Autotempest.com is another one. Autotempest will go out and search. In fact, Autotempest search cars.com, Craigslist, and many other services all at once through autotempest.com. So that's another one you might try. Craigslist has always been popular, although Craigslist is fading a little. because they've started to add fees and other new services like the next one I'm going to mention. Facebook Marketplace has taken over because there's no fees and people have quick access to it. So that has become also a very popular one. Auto Trader is an old one that's been around for a while. It used to be a newsprint magazine, but of course it's autotrader.com. And it's another resource that you might try in finding a vehicle. So I'll finish here with a little negotiation tip. And this is what I learned over the years, and that is he who speaks first usually loses. That's one of my rules. I'll usually do a good evaluation of the vehicle. And when I'm ready to make an offer, I'll have a list of the things that the car is lacking and the cost to fix it or repair it. And then I'll make an offer based on that. Sometimes the seller will offer to fix or install certain items that are missing. So with that list in hand, I'll ask if the price is negotiable. This is the point where I hold my tongue and wait for the seller to talk. Because usually if I'll wait, they will sometimes even make an offer, a lower offer than their listed price, uh, before I even ask to lower the price. So I will just ask them a simple question. I'll talk about some of the things that it needs, and I'll ask them, is the price negotiable? And then if they say yes, well, then I'll make them an offer and see what they come up with. I always have a predetermined amount that I will not go over. Even if I will oftentimes offer less, even if it may be below what I will actually pay, but I will always try to get a lower price to save money if possible. So I hope these tips are helpful to you, and I hope they're helpful for you in helping you find a vehicle, buy a vehicle to become a nomad.
Thank you, Cliff. I will start reading your questions in the order they came in, Cliff. But for the attendees to send your question, if you're on a device or a computer, search for participant or more where there's three little dots. You click on that, find the chat feature, type your question in and press send for Cliff on the topic of how to purchase a vehicle. So I'll get to your questions, Cliff. So your first question comes to us from Linda, and she's considering looking for a passenger van because it has lots of windows. What do you do with the extra seats? Is there a market to sell them? Does a passenger van have sufficient insulation?
That's a good question, and it's a common one. In fact, when I bought my van, it was a 14 passenger van and it was full of seats. Uh, Unfortunately, it didn't turn out that great. I ended up having to disassemble them and taking all of the upholstery material off of them and taking them to a scrapyard. That's what they required me to do in my area at the time. But the seats are oftentimes valuable, and there are many people out there that have purchased a vehicle that has had the seats removed, and they want the seats. So not long after I scrapped my seats, I had somebody looking for some. So I just didn't have time and a place to store them. But I would first try to sell them online, like Facebook Marketplace or whatever works in your area. But you might have to give them away, or you might have to scrap them.
Thank you, Cliff. And Christine asks, any suggestions on what to use to protect your undercarriage from salt erosion in winter?
Well, again, I'm going to mention that I'm a West Coast person and lived on the West Coast most of my life. I did live in New York for a few years, and I was faced with a vehicle that I had there, and it wouldn't pass inspection because it had rust in the body. And that's something that I've never experienced out west. But I do know that there is a treatment that people use on the East Coast, and it's a type of oil, and they put it in like a garden sprayer, and they spray the entirety of the under of the car. And then there is a specific product that you can buy in aerosol cans, and it comes with some long spouts on it to get up into different places under the vehicle, and I've seen videos on that. You might try checking out a video from a YouTuber called South Main Auto. He has several vehicles showing how to treat the underside of a car that are often in the East Coast or salty type conditions.
Wonderful. And Suzanne is asking, is this being recorded so I can view it again to take notes? And with your permission, I could answer this. Cliff, yes, this
Please do.
class, this class is being recorded. It will be available for future viewing on HOWA's YouTube channel. That's Homes on Wheels Alliance YouTube channel, and it will be uploaded for later viewing. Also, the chat, you can either download it if you're on a computer, or you can copy paste for save, but the chat would not be available after the class. Thank you. And Rose says to you, Cliff, good morning from Wyoming. Thanks so much, Cliff and HOWA. Mike, do you recommend all-terrain tires for general use? I expect to do mostly highway driving to boondocking areas.
You know, that's a really good question, and I just recently replaced my tires, and I replaced them with all-terrain tires. I previously did not have all-terrain tires, and even though I don't go very deep off-road, there is oftentimes places where there are a lot of sharp rocks, and I have seen a number of vehicles, and including mine. The first year I was returning from the desert, headed back up to Washington, I blew both of my front tires, and not at the same time, in different spots. But after I inspected them, I realized it was because the tread had been cut a lot by tires from me driving off road. Now, I was probably abused them more than I should have, but all-terrain tires are usually like 20% more. The cost isn't that much more. If you can get all-terrain tires, I definitely recommend it. Yeah, I would use those if I could.
Wonderful. And Matt says, what about body rust? Not the frame, but top rust.
Well, you know, that's a very subjective thing, you know. Does it make your vehicle look bad and draw negative attention? Uh, does it please you or not please you personally? Generally, some body rust is not that big of a deal. I see a lot of people that have vehicles that have some rust on them or some surface rust. So, you know, it's very subjective. It's hard to give a real great answer, but if it's cosmetic, it's up to you.
Wonderful. Robert says, thank you for the info. Do you use Carfax?
Carfax, yeah, absolutely. Carfax is a great tool. I bought a vehicle 2 years ago, and it was from a used car dealer, and it was offered at a low price, and I went in and offered him half of that price. Well, I had done the Carfax on it, and I knew what the service had been in the vehicle in the past, and the maintenance was excellent. And so, uh, even though I only spent $1,500 on that car, um, it was a great value, and the Carfax really helped me determine that in the first place. So in most cases, unless the vehicle is really in a low price group, Carfax can be very helpful.
Wonderful. And Kathy says, thank you, Cliff. You're giving us some great advice. And continue to ask, what are the main considerations between Class C and Class B?
All right. Well, first of all, I really haven't had time to thank you all for being here. I'm not a practiced presenter, but I really thank y'all for joining today. And I'm really grateful that I've had the chance to share this with you. And now, as far as the differences between sizes of like a Class A or a Class B, was that the question?
Yes. No, between a Class C and a Class B.
Okay.
What are the main considerations between Class C and Class B?
Well, the main difference, a Class B is smaller, and it's usually distinct in that the bathroom and the shower are combined. So you have what is called a wet bathroom. So it's designed so that you can close the door, pull a curtain, or do whatever you do. And inside, you may have the toilet sitting there next to you while you shower. So it's just a combined shower and bathroom, and it's generally a smaller vehicle, slightly smaller in size.
Right. And Holly says, is there anything specific to a larger RV I should check before getting an inspector?
Well, there is, and but it's another class altogether. And I would uh, I would say that it's not something that I could answer in briefly. I do personally now drive a Class C, but there's a even more extensive inspections required for an RV. So I would Bob has a number of videos showing a variety of RVs, and I would look at other videos, and it's likely that there will be one here one day that will also talk about how to inspect for an RV. But today, I don't think we're going to be able to cover it. But thank you.
Right. And Melinda, thank you so very much for your kind and warm compliment. Mike Dye says, thank you, Cliff. And another question for you. Do you worry or do anything about making sure it will pass smog or emission tests?
Absolutely. I That's one of the things I've missed in this, and I'll add that to my notes. It's very important that the vehicle has proof that it passed the inspection. So if a vehicle is currently registered, you know, in most states that wouldn't have got the registration without having passed. But you certainly want to make sure if it doesn't, if you don't know that for certain, that it will pass. And so thank you. That's really a good important point, and it should be added to the list of things to check. Thank you.
Wonderful. And Jay wants to know, what if you ask if the price is negotiable? The seller says yes, but nothing else. What do you do next?
Well, usually by that time, I've already determined how much I'm going to pay for that vehicle, and I'll usually offer them 10% less than that, maybe 10 or 20% less than I'm actually willing to pay, to see if there's more room. I mean, I've bought a vehicle before and later walked away and felt like, I probably could have got that vehicle for 10% less. So don't be afraid to ask. The worst thing that a person can do is say no. You might have an awkward moment, you might feel uncomfortable, but if you don't ask, you're never going to have a chance at getting a lower price. So just ask. Just be bold and just say, well, I could really, I would really like this vehicle if I could get it for $2,800. That's really where I fit on this vehicle, and see what they say. They might say, nah, I just can't do that. But I'll tell you what, if you could come up $200, I'll take that and you can have the van. So don't don't be afraid. Just give it a try. Stick your neck out there and say something. I often I took I had a business once, and I was going to lease a new property, and it was going to be expensive. It's going to cost me about $4,000 a month. And somebody told me, I read a online information about how to negotiate, and it suggested that I go in and make a super outrageous request. And I did. I went in and I asked them for my first 5 months rent to be free. I never thought in any way that they would give me that. I thought maybe they'd give me 2 months or maybe 1 month. They gave me 5 months of free rent. All I had to do was ask. I got that was about a $20,000 savings for my business at the time. So don't be afraid to ask. Uh, don't be afraid to be silly or embarrassed. Uh, just throw it out there. What can they do? It's part of the good experience too. If you go out and feel like you have to make a deal on just this one vehicle, that this has got to be it, then you may leave yourself not enough room to negotiate a good deal.
Wonderful. Do you ever buy a used vehicle from a dealer?
Oh, sure, sure. Just like anything, you got good dealers and bad dealers, though. So you have to take and apply all the criteria that you would to a used unknown person. You're going to apply the same criteria, check everything. Their interest is their interest. And so I don't mean to minimize or demonize in any way car dealers, but you have to do your homework. Oftentimes the prices, the margin that they need to make a profit will put them out of the market, but not always. Not always. I have maybe 10 or 20% of the time people I have bought or other people I know have bought vehicles from dealers and still got a good deal. So it really just depends on the deal.
Okay, and Val asks, Cliff, thanks for a great presentation. What engine size do you recommend for West Coast van life, considering mountains, etc.?
Well, it really depends on the vehicle. That's so subjective. On minivans, they're all pretty much equipped with standard power plants. They're they're not radically different from one van to another. On minivans, no, that's not completely true, but mostly. On full-size vans, you often will have V6, medium-sized V8, large V8, and for most people, it really comes down to what is going to be the most economical operation. And so sometimes a bigger motor may get better gas mileage than a smaller motor. So you can't always go just on size. My first vehicle had an enormous 460 cubic inch motor in it. And no matter what I did, it got 9 miles to the gallon. No matter what. Go fast, go slow. It always got a terrible 9 miles to the gallon. So I used that vehicle for my first year and I upgraded after that. But uh, uh, you probably want to look for something that shows the best kind of mileage. That's my goal usually.
And Leanne says, I just purchased a 1985 E150 that was professionally built as a camper back in 1985. I'm in the process of upgrading. I also wonder if the van has sufficient insulation.
Well, that's a good question. But for most of us, and this is not for everyone, it depends on how you choose to do your nomad life. But most of us like to be in weather that is comfortable. So if I'm in weather that I need insulation, I usually am at a place that I don't want to be at. So if it's cold enough for me that I don't that I need insulation, I'll probably be somewhere else. Now, for some people, they may have to live in a certain location, certain part of the country, a certain state, even a certain city, based on their own circumstances. So if you're in an area where you may be in cold weather or maybe excessive hot weather, you have to take that into consideration. Most of us, though, the idea is that if we travel to places that are comfortable temperatures, we won't have to. We won't need insulation. But it's many people put it in. Uh, Many people put it in and say, I never really needed it. So it just depends on, again, what are you going to do? Where are you going to go? You're going to be in the cold, and get insulation.
And this one is similar. Linda says, do passenger fans require additional insulation?
Yeah, again, it's pretty much the same question. All really based on where you're going to be. If you want to just travel all over and see all kinds of climates and changes, I get that. But most nomads like to find places that are pleasant and spend a little time there. Then they move to another place. But they don't spend a huge amount of time driving a lot. They really don't. Surprisingly, nomads don't drive that much.
Would you ever buy a vehicle with a salvage title?
Buying a vehicle with salvage title is totally fine if it's been repaired properly, but it does devalue the vehicle. If you buy a vehicle with a rebuilt title, it is likely that when you go to sell the vehicle, if you choose to, it will be worth about 20% less than a vehicle that has a non-rebuilt title. So as far as it being safe, that's determined based on who repaired it after it was totaled or after it was considered. Uh, Usually they're totaled for a reason, or they've been turned into a dismantler. I used to have an auto wrecking business. We would bring a vehicle in, and sometimes we would resell them, but it would still go out on a salvage title, and they would get a new title. But when they go to sell that vehicle, you got to know that in the marketplace, people will say, "Oh, well, that doesn't have that has a rebuilt title, so it's not worth quite as much." So expect that.
Suzanne says, great, thank you. Ron says, thank you, Cliff. Excellent presentation and information. And Mona and Mike has a question. I'll read them together. Question, what are the best tires when you replace your tires? Is there one manufacturer better than another? And Mike continued, what brand of all-terrain tires do you purchase?
Boy, that is it's an ever-changing. It's kind of an ever-changing thing. But if you can buy a BF Goodrich all-terrain tires, are one of the ones that's been touted for many years that people like. Generally, they're fairly similar. Buy what you can afford. The tires that I have a set of tires that are slightly off-brand. They're called Patagonias, all-terrain tires, and they were what I could get at the time. I didn't have a lot of time to wait, and uh, so that's the brand I bought. I've had them for a year. Really happy with them, and even though they were a little cheaper than some of the others, they performed really great. No problems with them. Very happy with them.
Wonderful. Amira says, thank you, Cliff and HOWA. Great presentation and info. And Linda asks, what is your opinion on auto auctions?
Auto auctions. Well, most well, let me start by saying I used to own an auto wrecking business. It was mentioned I used to own a recycling business, and I purchased 3 vehicles a day was my typical average vehicles that I purchased. And I dismantled and processed 3 vehicles a day. So uh, oh, sorry, I lost my train of thought there a little bit. Could you please read the question back?
Auto auctions.
Oh, on the auction. So,
Your
and yeah, I got it. So many of the vehicles that I bought when I had my salvage business were from auctions, and so I bought over 50% of the vehicles that I bought from auctions. And here's what I say about auctions: you have to be the one who determines whether or not that vehicle is good. And oftentimes people will put something at auction because they have something that they can't figure out, or uh, it may have some severe damage that you can't determine. So the risk factor goes way up. But if you're knowledgeable and you are know a lot about vehicles, then I would certainly consider an auction. I've bought tons of vehicles at auctions, and many of them I put right back on the road. So auctions are okay, but not for the inexperienced person. And also on auctions, watch out. There's oftentimes up to 30% fees that are added on top of the auction price. So if you don't see those in advance or understand how they're going to be applied, you may make your purchase and think, oh, I got this vehicle for $3,000. And then when you go to pick it up, they tell you the total's over 4,000. You might then be a little shocked. So make sure you know all the upfront costs of auctions.
Wonderful. And Holly is hoping for a class in a bigger RV someday. Amira says, considering a Chevy Express, any cons I should consider? I have saved up and ready to purchase a 2019.
Chevy Expresses have a great reputation. I don't know of anything specific that I would look out for. I see tons and tons of Nomads and Chevy Expresses, so it's a very popular vehicle, and but nothing specific. But good luck, and do all the inspecting you can, and good luck. I hope you get a great vehicle.
And we have 3 minutes rather left, Cliff, for questions and answers. Melinda asks, Cliff, you camp in CRV, but also Ford and others. What is your personal fave of every vehicle and why?
No, you have to read that again. You're breaking up a little.
Okay. You camp in CRV, but also Ford and others. What is your personal fave and every vehicle you have had and why? Thank you for your generosity and sharing your experience.
Well, boy, it's a big question. And honestly, probably my favorite vehicle that I've used as a nomad is a little Saturn station wagon. It got 37 miles to the gallon and never broke. But as far as, a lot of it is personal preference, more so sometimes than all the mechanical things. You have to find something that you feel good and comfortable in, something that makes you feel good. And so, yeah, there's tons of mechanical attributes to consider, and it's kind of endless in a way. So if you kind of stay in the criteria that keeps vehicles away, like if you get vehicles that are over 200,000 miles, you're going to have a lot more problems. So try to keep the level of problems down and the level of satisfaction up. That's my best advice. Make sure you get something you feel good about.
Okay, and Robert says, what about buying a van from Canada or another country?
I know people who have done just exactly that. It's generally a big hassle, and it's easier to buy one and take it to Canada, but it's really hard to buy one in Canada and bring it down here. That's my experience. I tried to do it once on an RV. The deal fell through because we couldn't complete all the paperwork. If there's some really great deal, I would find an expert and ask them, somebody who's used to bringing stuff over the border. But generally, I wouldn't recommend it. I don't even recommend you get it outside of your state if you can help it, because of the potential problem of where you're going to license it. Has it been licensed in your state? All kinds of potential problems that can happen. So closer to you, the better.
Wonderful. We'll end in this note, Cliff. Leanne says, great answer, thank you. And Sherry says, not Sherry, Caroline says, thank you, Cliff. What wonderful ideas and information. This was very helpful. So thank you, Cliff, again for such a comprehensive presentation and covering the whole topic of how to buy a vehicle. Thank you also very much for your attendance to HOWA's virtual caravan class, and do enjoy your weekend. Cliff, any final thoughts?
I just want to thank everyone for joining, and I hope some of this information is helpful. And I wish you all the luck, and I encourage you to take the step of faith and get out and see what the nomadic life is like if you haven't already started. Thanks again. I really appreciate you joining.